you have on the phone, if they could just state their name and address for the record.
Maureen Villani. Good evening. It's Maureen Villani, tax collector. Business address is 165 Church Street, New Haven, Connecticut.
Good evening, Maureen. Thank you for joining us. Anything in addition
Certainly.
to what Michael has told us? Anything in addition you want to let us know?
No, I think Michael has summarized it very well.
Perfect. Thank you. So before I open up the floor for questions, I would like to recognize Alder Santiago, who has joined us, Alder Douglas, who have joined us, and Alder Antunes, who have joined us. You're welcome. If anybody is wishing to speak or ask any questions before you are recognized, just remember to turn on your video in order for you to speak and ask a question. If you do not have a video, we'll certainly skip over and allow for someone else to ask. But at this time, I'm going to go around the room and I'm going to initiate with Alder Roth if you have any questions.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do have more than 2 questions, but I'll start with 2 and appreciate that we'll have another round. And thank you, Michael, for that helpful explanation. Actually, sort of one whole set of my questions had been around sort of what the notice process would be and how we can help. It's great we can then help share the information that you all are creating. I guess the 2 other questions I'll ask for now. One question has to do with tracking kind of how many people are taking advantage of these 2 programs and how that will impact our cash flow. And so I didn't know if there was a plan. As you said, people really have until August 2nd or 3rd to pay, so we really won't know until that date if people seem to be taking advantage of the tax. We'll know on July 1st. I think that's when people would have to file the application for the deferral, but we won't know if people are doing the low interest until after August 2nd or 3rd. And will you would it be possible, like through the chair, to get updates after, I guess, after July 1st, how many people did the tax deferral? And then how many seem to be doing the low interest, just so we have a sense of kind of the impact there?
Sure. So, and thank you for the question, Alder Roth. That actually did remind me of something I did forget to mention. As far as tracking, that's why I sort of set up a flow chart internally with us to know who is eligible and who is taking advantage. And the one thing or 2 items your question reminded me of was, so just so you know, when we have these applications, people are attesting that all the information is true. So for residents and businesses, we cannot require documentation per OPM on proof of, for example, one of the summary of the criteria for residents is that they lost 20% of their income due to COVID-19. The only documentation that is required is proof of residency that we will then verify in the tax database for this program. So my office will be keeping track of the actual taxpayers when we receive the application, if they're eligible, ineligible, if we have to contact them for something. And I think one of the important things for us to keep track of is what is the amount of their taxes due, right? Because at the end of the day, we want to see how much in actual funding did we defer from July to October. Because as I talk to my counterparts in other towns, which sort of flows into your next question, is it's hard to predict based on our tax system how many people are going to be eligible and how much in cash flow we're actually going to need come July. The one important piece of this is banks and lien holders are absolutely not eligible for this program, period. So we know there's a base there's a tax base that will absolutely come in July. And we are estimating that that is 40 to 50 million that will absolutely come in July, no matter what. As far as cash flow, we have been looking at this, and I said it at the last finance committee, the committee meeting, the FRAC meeting. What we're looking at is we are looking at tax anticipation notes. It's not something new that we've done any year for the last 5 years. What we're looking at is just borrowing that money earlier, as opposed to October or November when we would usually borrow the funding. We're looking at actually starting the process now based on whatever the actual ordinance that is passed out on Tuesday will be. I have our Treasury Department working on our cash flow statement, and that determines how much in TANs that we actually need to borrow. So that will be done primarily at the end of June, beginning of July. So that way we make sure we have enough cash on hand to continue paying payroll, payables. August is usually when we have a large our first debt service payment is due for the fiscal year. So we take all of those factors into consideration as far as cash flow goes. So in the first quarter of the current fiscal year, so July to September 2019, we collected about $140 million in tax revenue, because that was the first half of the taxes that were due. So we're using that number as a basis, and then again, determining whatever the final mill rate that comes out Tuesday, if we have to add or decrease anything from that number, that's what we're basing our cash flow off of. So right now, I'm projecting that about 2/3 of that money will come in July, and then 1/3 is what will be deferred from July to October. So approximately 40 to 50 million, 40 to 60 million. I know that's a large range, but again, there's really no way of projecting this, is what we're figuring would come in October.
Great, thank you so much for all, that was really helpful to hear. And then my second question, this is maybe an ignorant question, but if someone applies for a deferral, are they applying for, and they have both house taxes and then car taxes, are they applying for sort of all their taxes? And I guess the second part of that question is, say someone pays through escrow for their property taxes on their home, and therefore they're not allowed to apply under the tax deferral program, but say they do meet the standard to qualify, could they apply for it for their car?
So that's a great question. So the answer to that is basically no. That is what I meant by, and I should have probably clarified it a little bit more. Banks which hold your escrow payments, they are not eligible for the deferral program at all. So your bank, even if you have, a delayed, even if they worked out a payment plan or whatever the case is, they cannot withhold those escrow tax payments at all. So those banks have to make the payments in July. There's no getting around that. And one other point, which was in your last question, I don't think I addressed, was the low interest program. Everyone is automatically, since we elected both programs, everyone is automatically enrolled in the low interest program. So they will, if you have a past due balance if you're not eligible for the deferral program, but you have a small balance due after August 2nd, you'll still get that lower interest rate on your delinquent balance. So that is one thing I forgot to address in your last question.
Thanks. I realized I didn't do a very good job. I made my question confusing. I guess if I can just sort of clarify what I was trying to ask. If someone pays their house tax through an escrow payment, but then just pays car tax out of their bank account, could they wouldn't qualify for the deferral program for their house tax, but could they get it for their car, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Great question.
Maureen, do you know the answer to that one? I'm looking at the application now. I know all three tax
Yes.
categories, personal property, motor vehicle, and real estate are all eligible for the program.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I am not sure. So on the deferral application, it does ask the property for which the deferral is requested. So I can only assume, and Maureen can correct me if I'm wrong, that if you have a motor vehicle, since this application is asking, you can possibly be eligible for the deferral program as well.
Yes, yes, if I may speak. Number 5, property for which deferral is requested asks for the address of the real estate, the year, make, model of the vehicles, or the type of personal property.
So then, yeah, based on OPM, they can still be eligible for their car if they attest to this application.
Yes, that's my
Thank you.
understanding. Yes. Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Thank you, Michael, for that clarification, because I was also a little bit confused if we were going to be applying for both or just simply one, and if they were allowed to have one or the other. But you've made it clear. I'm just going to go from what I see in my square here. Alder Singh, any questions from your end? Alder Singh? You're muted. You're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My audio is going in and out. Part is unstable. Through the chair, can we have an email when that document is coming out, the flyer? Can we have that flyer emailed to us so we can review that? And secondly, that from the state which adopt the program, can we have that email
Alder
as
Singh,
well? Thank you.
Alder Singh, can you say the second request, the second question? You were coming in and out.
The city adopt this both program from the state, the deferral. Could we have a copy of that also, please, through our email?
So like a breakdown of what Michael and Maureen were referring to.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
They can send that to Don and Al so that we can then distribute it to this body. Alder Edwards.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification, you talked about landlords being able to apply. What's the difference between a landlord application and a homeowner that lives in their home? Is there a major difference in what qualifies them and what doesn't? I know you said it was pretty standard across the board, but like, how is that determination made? Like, what's the difference?
So the landlord is really considered the resident, which means you own your home. The landlord is really a management company that, and I'm looking at the application as well.
Okay.
Maureen, can you answer that one? I mean, I assume
The landlord.
Go ahead, Maureen.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just looking at the OPM application. Under landlords, they have to attest that they have attached documentation proving that the property has or will suffer a significant revenue decline, or they've attached documentation proving that forbearance was offered to the tenants or lessees.
Thank you. Thank you, Maureen, because mine went in and out on that piece. So I think what you would have to do is prove that you're a landlord with an actual lease and, that you have an actual tenant. Again, based on the guidelines from OPM, in order for a landlord to be eligible for the deferral program, it looks like they put a set of documentation on landlords.
Okay.
To prove that they are an actual landlord and they provided some type of relief, which has caused them a revenue loss. So you know, that's going to be one of our spot checks, is to make sure that people aren't trying to double dip here, right? As a resident and a landlord, and try to do whatever it is to their taxes, which comes back to Alder Roth's question earlier about tracking.
Exactly. And that was just my concern as to how they would be able to navigate, or, you know, double dipping,
Right.
someone that lives in their own home, you know. All right, that's the only question I have for right now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Thank you.
And then I have here, let me just maximize this for a second. Alder Festa.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you for hearing this evening. Really appreciate it, because it answers many, many questions that residents will have, and the sooner that we can answer them, I feel the sooner we'll be prepared to this challenge. I have a question regarding when will the website be active, as well as the phone number? And will there also be an in-person process for those that don't have access to the internet, or are challenged in that regard?
So thank you, Alder Festa, for that question. That is a great question with the in-person piece. So the phone number is active at the moment. I haven't given it out yet because as we're waiting for the press release and everything to go out, I don't want questions to start coming in and our assessor's office isn't ready and everything yet. But the phone number is active. Like I said, it will be a one phone number that someone in the assessor's office will have access to at all times. As far as the in-person piece, so right now on the press release, we have, you can apply online or download the application and mail it to the assessor's office. The reason we did that was because I think we have to see how reopening and everything else goes with City Hall. And we can always change that requirement if, you know, the application is going to be due June 30th. If come 2 weeks, if we find that we can accommodate people to come in and drop off the application in the assessor's office, go in, go out, not a lot of foot traffic or whatever the case is, then we will absolutely update and probably send out a press release. And I'd be more than happy to notify Al so he can send it out to all the alders and everyone, so they can get the word out. But I think, you know, if we have, let's say, 2,000 people that are going to qualify for this, we don't want 500 of them in the building at this time, until, you know, we get everything up and going.
Okay, and again, do you know when it will be active? When is the press release supposed to be announced?
I'm planning on tomorrow, or I hate to do this to him, but if I have to ask Gage to work on Monday just to get this out, then we will get it out Monday. Again, I think my issue was really just waiting on a few things. I actually hoped to have this up a week and a half ago, but there were some holdups, but I'm gonna get it out as quickly as hopefully tomorrow or Monday.
Okay, great. And I'm going to assume that once and if City Hall does open, you'll have a plan and process for the in-person protocol for safety. And I mean, I guess the phone number that once it's released will also help a lot of the residents get questions answered regarding whether they can download this PDF or not, and if they have even online access. And that's my main concern, because we're going to have probably some elderly that are going to need some assistance with the process.
Understood. And I think one important piece to note also with our assessor's office handles the elderly relief program. And I think they've made accommodations right now to sort of working with that program as it currently stands. So I think, you know, again, depending on where we are next week or a week and a half when City Hall reopens, we can certainly revisit this in-person plan. But as you mentioned, you know, safety is always the number one thing for the employees and the residences, right?
Yes. All my other questions were answered. Thank you for your clear explanation. It is greatly appreciated, and it does answer a lot of questions we were getting also from residents. So thank you, Mr. Gormany, and thank you, Chair, for hearing this again.
Welcome, Alder Festa. Alder Winter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for hearing this item. Just following up on Alder Festa's idea of folks who may not be excited about logging onto the computer, maybe could we post that we could mail an application to someone on the in the press release and on the website. I guess it's hard if it's on the website, but at least it could get out there, and we could get that process started with in the absence of having City Hall open.
Yeah, that is certainly something I can look into and consider. Just so you know, I mean, with City Hall being closed and even, the mayor and the team working on reopening, there is a delay in mail in City Hall. So, that is my only hesitation to mailing stuff out, is not getting it. It's easier for us to get incoming mail because it's all going to one place from the post office when it comes in. As far as outgoing mail, that actually depends on, we have a third-party service. So when our third-party service can come to City Hall, which may not be until a Thursday or a Friday. So if I have a bunch of mail sitting there, it may only be mailed out once a week. That may not give it enough time. But I can certainly look into if a taxpayer or a business does not have online access, how we can get the application to them. Even if we can email it to somebody they know, so that way they can print it at their home or something like that, whatever the case is.
And could you mentioned landlords having to show some kind of proof of loss of income? Would that be like a written statement from a tenant saying that they're unable to cover their rent that month, or is that, could you provide sort of an example?
Sure.
Of that? And would they also have to provide something similar to prove that they are passing along the forbearance to their tenants?
Yes, we would definitely require something from the landlords that is official as far as, documenting that proof. Again, OPM was very lenient on a lot of these rules, even though they required landlords to submit documentation, OPM still left it very, very broad. So I honestly think like now all landlords have to have the same type of information, but I think we're going to have to take it on a case-by-case basis. And our economic development department and LCI, which I forgot to mention in the beginning, because they have the most interactions with city landlords, they are actually helping myself, Maureen, and Alex with the landlord piece with this program for the next month. So again, I think it's going to depend on the landlord and if they can provide certain documentation, but I mean, we're going to have to make sure it's official documentation and something that, they just didn't create the day before, right? And that's always everybody's fear, is like all of a sudden producing a piece of document that says you gave your tenant forbearance. So.
Well, thank you for expediting this. I think the sooner we can get it started, then the sooner we can try to address some of these logistical challenges and help meet the residents' needs. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Winter. So yeah, I was gonna make a suggestion as well that maybe bringing into the loop the LCI department, because I know that, for example, the specialists here in the city, such as Lori Lopez, who are actively engaged with the community, actively engaged with the district manager, Sergeant Fumiati, and they're out and about all day long. For example, I get daily text messages, or every other day we get communications and things that are occurring. So we certainly know that if you were to provide maybe even copies, hard copies to them, I don't know, 10, 15 copies, and they can actually distribute it to the actual tenant or landlord, and they can then bring it to your office, Michael and Maureen, because they're certainly very active and engaging, and I'm certain that they won't say no to it. So Just a suggestion as well.
Yes,
Absolutely. I think,
yes, thank you.
yep, you brought up I will definitely, I think one aspect is I think I can talk to the chief of police, which I just didn't think about until this meeting,
Yeah.
on maybe helping out in paper copies if needed.
Absolutely, because every district may get just 10, 15 copies in the actual substation, and if need be, they can just write it back there, or even in their vehicles, and whatever the case may be.
Yep.
Because we certainly don't want to add upon to their workload, as we know they're certainly working very well and being understaffed. But without further ado, Aldo Santiago, any questions, sir?
Well, I have my comment. You just took it from me by saying, maybe we could bring it out to the community especially the elderly. Maybe bring the substations, bring the applications, which every district got more than one substation. So you took it from me. So
Didn't mean to take your thunder.
hey, that's fine. That's fine. As long as it's out there, so we could help the elderly. It's
Absolutely.
fine. I don't care who says it. We gotta get this done because some of them need help. So let's help them.
Agreed. Thank you, Alder. Alder Douglas, any questions, sir? Comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the rest of the committee. So I sorry I had some technical difficulties, but can you make that clear again on the deferral for the homeowners with in regards to the escrow accounts, if their taxes are being paid through escrow, how does this and how will this affect them? Do they get a deferral also, or how is it done?
No, so if the mortgage company is paying your taxes on behalf of you as in that home, the bank itself still has to make that tax payment in July. But I think the question was raised but what if you actually own your car, right? Because even if a car dealership has a lien on your car, because you're paying a monthly payment on your car, that lien holder still has to make the payments in July. But if you outright own your car, you can still fill out this deferral application. And as Maureen mentioned, in box number 5 of the OPM application, it actually asks you which type of tax are you trying to defer: real estate, motor vehicle, or personal property. So in this case, if you outright owned your car, you would just say motor vehicle on the application and leave everything else blank.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarity. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. And any other of my colleagues that are wishing to speak, Alder DeCola or Alder Antunes?
No, thank you. I have nothing.
All right. And so let's go around again. I know that Alder Roth, you had an additional question, so I'll go to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few additional things. I'm sure for some reason and I'm probably imagining this, I had thought when I originally read the OPM notice, it also said people would qualify if they were on the front lines of COVID as sort of a separate category from suffering financially. Is that a factor, or am I just imagining that had been there?
Based on the application that I'm reading from OPM, I'd have to honestly look at the question and answer piece, unless Maureen has been working with the Tax Collectors Association on this, but I do not see that anywhere on the application.
Yes, I would agree. I've not, with the piece that referred to the low interest rate or the deferral program, I have not heard or read anything about that. It may have been in the executive order from the governor in other areas, but I have not seen that or read it with regard to these two programs that they were offering.
Okay, great. That's really helpful. And just a couple other things quickly. I mean, it sounds like there wouldn't really, obviously the low interest, there's no appeal because everyone qualifies, and the deferral, there really wouldn't be an appeal for anyone because you either attest or you don't attest. Is that correct?
So one of the things, and on the, so what's going to go up on the website is one notice about the application and then the actual application itself. In the notice that will be before the application is bolder and underlined about attesting, because we actually did ask OPM about that. The explanation that we got was when somebody is attesting, whether it's this process or another process, they are attesting that all the information that they're providing is true and accurate and basically legal. So we can do random audits. That is what OPM said. We cannot require additional documentation or anything. We can only do random audits on applications that come in. But on the front letter, I just made sure I put about that attesting part, because when someone attests to something and someone finds out it's false, we have legal recourse with the city to go after them to the fullest extent of the law. And that is what OPM was relying on, people making sure people acknowledge that they are attesting to it. That's why it's on the application as opposed to just a signature. Again, they left this program very, very broad with this program with OPM. So we're not the, I've actually had a few other colleagues in other municipalities ask about this. And I know Maureen worked very diligently with the Tax Collectors Association. They all had the same type of questions, a ton of questions that we actually needed clarified from OPM. So.
Great, thanks so much. And I'm just curious how, in a typical year, what percentage of taxpayers don't pay until October 1st anyhow?
It's not a large percentage. I think what you see is the delinquent balance that you see. It's not the delinquent balance come October is nowhere near as significant as what we're going to see in the deferral. Through the chair of this committee, we can try to get you some numbers on that if needed, but
you have enough to do. Don't worry about getting it. I just thought you knew off the top of your head.
Yeah, no,
curious. Nope. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder Roth. I know that Alder Festa, I know you had your hand up for a while, so here. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quick, is there a deadline? When is the deadline? And is there a grace period to the deadline for these deferral programs?
So the deadline is June 30th. Unless there is some extenuating circumstance, because there's a lot of back-end work that has to go into this once we check to make sure that delinquent notices don't go out to people who are actually eligible for this program. So I think because there's a lot of internal back-end work that has to be done, especially by Maureen's office, and depending on how we reopen and where we are during that time and the number of staff that she has, that's why we have a June 30th deadline, because it is a lot harder internally to adjust folks' taxes, which is why we don't want to say the deadline is July 20th in the middle of when taxes are due. And there is not an appeals process for this, for these programs per OPM. So.
Very good.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anybody else from the committee that wishes to ask any questions at this time? Alder Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'm giving you more work, but I just had a question. Alder Rothschild. I just had a question about the random auditing we're allowed to do. Within the plan, do we have it set in motion that we automatically want to audit a certain percentage of landlord applications versus regular applications, or just do we have a plan to make sure we are doing some auditing across the board, period, with some of these applications?
Well, that's why I wanted to bring in LCI and economic development on the landlord piece, because I think With that being the only section that has documentation, I think that they are looking at the documentation because they know the landlords to make sure that that is accurate. As far as the resident and business side, again, based on our guidance, I mean, it is exactly what it says, a random audit. So I would literally have to say, all right, record number 45 is the one I'm choosing. I can call up that person, ask them for proof if I think something has gone wrong. Again, I think it's going to depend on if we get 20,000 applications, you know, that's a different story, and you know, we'll go from there. So I hope that answered your question.
It did, and I wasn't trying to give you a lot of extra work. You know,
No.
I'm just trying to, the integrity of the program and just seeing what's working, and, and God forbid something like this happen again,
Yep.
or this is a continuous thing, we would kind of see, well, we had this percentage of whatever that didn't work, or
Yep. Well, just so you know, that is one of the concerns, and I think that is one of the delays we had in actually getting the notice, was getting more guidance from OPM, because we were also, along with some of your legislative colleagues, thought that, we thought the eligibility factor was very, very broad, and we could possibly require more documentation. And basically OPM shut us down and said only random audits. So we had the same concerns from your other colleagues and from an administrative standpoint on the integrity of the applications as well. So.
Thank you. You definitely answered my question, and I have no further questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Alder Singh, anything from you?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you. I'm all set.
Okay. Alder Douglas, I'm just doing one more round before I open it up to the public.
No, I appreciate the info. I think I've absorbed it all. I want to thank you all for the info. Thank you.
Great. Any of my other alders? Alder Winter, Alder DeCola, Alder Antunes. Okay. So if there's no additional, Alder Antunes?
No, I have nothing.
Okay. Yeah, I saw the green square, so I thought you had something to say. So if there are no more questions from the committee, I will open it up now to the public for any public testimony, any public questions, concerns. And once you approach, if you can just say your name and address for the record. So Don, do you see anybody from the public that would like to either ask a question or a comment regarding this workshop?
They'll have to raise their hand if they're interested, and then we'll bring them in.
Okay.
But as of right now, no one's their hand raised.
All right, so I will go ahead and does anybody from the public wish to provide public testimony on the second item? Does anybody want to speak from the public regarding item 2 and the conversation we just had in this workshop? And for the third time, I would like to ask anybody from the public that wish to provide public testimony. Okay.
I move we close the public portion.
Second?
I hear a motion and a second for the closure of the public testimony. Any conversation, any comments? No? If you want to close it, please indicate it by saying aye.
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 Any nays? Any abstention? The ayes have it. The public portion has closed. And because this was a public workshop, we do not have to do any particular thing to this item. We don't have to move it or anything like of that sort, but we certainly want to thank both Michael and Maureen for providing such an insightful overview of these two items that we're discussing. Certainly, we want to be able to understand the ramifications to that will impact our city budget, given that we are enduring a timing or a pandemic that is certainly challenging. So by having this understanding, and hopefully now Alder Roth, Vesta, and Winters, as well as this committee, we have a better understanding so that we can provide this information to our constituents and better assist them. And I will go ahead and open up the floor for any discussion to anybody before I entertain a motion to adjourn. Saying none, I'll accept the motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I hear motion for adjournment and seconded. I don't need to have any discussion. Please indicate with an aye.
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 And nays. Okay, the items have it. I hereby close this meeting. We're adjourned.
You
Thank you
all.
very much.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone. Thank you, Al and Dunn and everybody. Thank you for your cooperation and be safe, be well. And I'll see you guys once we reopen. Take care.
Thank you. You as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you, colleagues.